what other people can see on Facebook. And last time, both Mel and Pete were going, oh, there's 5 people there. Hello, 5 people, and things like that. And I wasn't able to see that. But this time I want to be in. I want to see.
Do it, Raj. Well, I want to see cool stuff.
Yeah, but I don't know where exactly, Mel. Where am I going to be able to see this?
So I'm also tech support. Go to your HappySmarts page.
Yeah, I'm there already.
Refresh it.
Oh, okay. That's what I wasn't doing. Okay.
Hey, everyone watching. Thanks for being here. We're going to talk about things that make us happy and smart today on this
in the app?
Episode of Happy Hour, HappySmarts Happy Hour. Right, Raj?
Yeah, HappySmarts Happy Hour. That's what it's going to be called from
That's good.
Yeah, you like it?
Brilliant.
I love it.
Kelly?
Brilliant.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. All right, very good, Kelly. Oh, yeah, that's good. Yeah, now you're centered. You weren't centered before. Okay, now you're centered.
Just you can boss me around too. Like this is your show.
No. It's our show. It's our show, and everyone's going to be happy here. Okay, everyone's going to be happy. That's a condition that you got to be happy to be on this show.
Done.
All right. And anytime you feel you're not happy, you got to excuse yourself.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll be right
back. Okay. Anytime you're less happy than the average person watching this show.
Interesting. Okay. That's really, now I'm doing some math in my head. That's hard to assess. I'm gonna be honest with you, but I'll do my best to be continually happy. It's easy looking at your smiling face. So I'm.
Oh, really? Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, listen. Welcome everyone, and I still, it says live here, but I don't know what to do. I'm really, I need to kind of bone up on my tech skills. I don't know how to do that.
We're good, Raj. We're live. There's 30 people watching. Everyone watching, we would love to know where you're tuning in from. Go ahead and write in the comments, say hi,
yes,
and let us know where in the world you are.
Also, Mel, I had a poll below this. It's somewhere there in the vicinity. If they look around, they'll see it. And in the poll, I asked them, has the coronavirus outbreak made life less stressful to them? For them, more stressful, or stress levels have stayed the same, or it really depends on the day. Okay, I don't know if you guys can see that poll.
In the Facebook page?
Yeah, it should be right.
I'm trying to look at this on the Facebook page, and I am failing.
Okay. So I don't know. Maybe they can't see it, but if they can.
People are telling us.
Where they're from.
Near Houston. Kate is from North Carolina. We've got Joanne in Minnesota. Akil in India. Ooh, we're global.
Wonderful.
Love it.
Yeah, that's lovely. Lovely to see you all. Lovely to see you all. And some of you guys who are tuning in may have fully expected to see Marshall Goldsmith, one of my favorite human beings on earth, and one of Kaylee's favorite human beings on earth. Yeah, her father. Okay, there's going to be a father-daughter joint interview, but unfortunately, due to technical problems, he wasn't able to join. I didn't think that the problems were insurmountable, Kelly, to be honest with you. He just looked like a ghost, right?
Oh, no.
Which is not how he normally looks. And so his looks kind of got degraded a little bit. But I thought that he could still come and maybe shut his audio out and just given people around the world the pleasure of listening to his sage advice on various things. But he said, no, I'm not going to come on if I'm going to look like a ghost. And
I understand that.
Not on audio, not on video, if you guys are going to be on video, which I understand too.
Yeah.
But our loss, okay. But next time, I'm hoping that he's able to make it.
We'll strong arm him. I feel like we've got some good ends there. Also, I feel like I've heard him talk so many times that I'm happy to just parrot him and answer on his behalf.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. I can give you some Marshall Goldsmith inspired answers. If the Kelly Goldsmith inspired answers are not cutting it, I can play the role of Marshall Goldsmith. All
right, Kelly, that's wonderful. Now, when you wear the Marshall Goldsmith hat, how do we know that you're speaking on his behalf versus yourself?
Well, to be honest, it's pretty obvious because truthfully, the only thing I know much about, right, as Raj is also a marketing professor, is going to be consumer behavior and how consumers respond to scarcity and uncertainty. I've been studying that for about a decade. Beyond that, anything else is me just trying to steal from my dad, right, and making it up as I go along. So you'll know, based on the topic, right?
All right, very good. But just to make it completely clear to everyone, can you lower your kind of tone, octave?
Just not scream at you.
No. Just like the pitch. When you're talking on behalf of Kelly, you go like how you're talking right now. But when you're speaking on behalf of your dad, you can go,
Oh,
So
it's a
what
little
is the
lower.
thing
I
with
also
you?
can like squint my eyes a little bit. I feel like when he's thinking, he's got this like, and he does this stuff with his hands. So I've seen him speak enough that maybe
Mm,
I'll just adopt some, let it go, let it go. I'll adopt some Marshall
Ooh.
Goldsmith-esque mannerisms. I could do like a little bit of the hair slick back too.
okay.
He's my biological dad, right? So we look kind of alike. So again, I'll try. It's
Okay.
big shoes to fill, but I'll try through
Okay.
gestures and hair mainly. Yeah.
All right. Wonderful. We're going to start now with the first serious question.
Oh my
And this is
gosh.
to you, Kelly, not to
Do
you,
it.
Marshall. Okay. This is to you, Kelly.
I'm so excited.
So, one of the reasons that you're so well known around the world, there's many reasons, but one of the reasons is that you were on the show Survivor. What is it, 20 years back?
It was 2001, which is loco. Yeah.
Okay. So,
Loco.
what did you say, Mel? Sorry, I didn't catch it.
Oh, she said which is loco, which is
Loco.
Yes.
Yeah, Loco. There was a Ricky Martin song, right?
La Vida Loca was the Ricky Martin song. You
Yeah.
clearly were not as plugged into pop culture in 2001 as I was. Yes.
Right. So that is one of the most unusual things that anybody could have done, certainly as a marketing academic. So
There we
hats
go.
off to you,
Thank
right,
you.
for leading such an interesting life. That's wonderful. So you were on Survivor. Tell us about that experience. Do you still get fan mail?
Occasionally, mainly from people in prison. Honestly, that's always been my fan base. I think because they're bored, is my guess. Like if you are truly bored and just, that I guess you email everybody or you send a note to everybody from the show. So I've gotten some of those letters. Other than that, though, not so much. What it was like to be on the show was awesome. So if you guys I know some of you guys probably weren't even born in 2001. Some of my students were like 2 years old when I was on the show, which is like really hard for me to wrap my brain around, but it's true. So yeah, if you remember what reality TV was like back in the day, it was a whole different landscape, right? So Survivor was the first reality game show in the United States. There was like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was the antecedent to Survivor. This in America was like giving away $1 million. You've got to be kidding me. So then Survivor came along and it was developed by Mark Burnett and his colleagues. And they had done this show called Eco Challenge, which I'm quite positive none of you have ever watched. And Eco Challenge, I think it aired on some like esoteric, kind of National Geographic-esque network. And basically teams on Eco Challenge, it was teams of 5 and they paid to do this Eco Challenge, right? They paid to be tortured. I think it was $50,000 a team. So that was part of the business model of that show. It wasn't really about getting people to watch it as much as it was about these really adventurous teams that wanted this really hardcore challenge. And they did put it on air. So that was Mark Burnett's background. And he had this real strong belief that like the suffering element was a big part of Survivor. So he put on season 1. And I mean, if you guys saw season 1, which aired in 2000, it was like, they did not know what they were doing. It just so happened to be like a very interesting concept, especially back in the day when there was just nothing like that. Like the voting each other off aspect was like very novel and very cool. So they did season 1, best show in the country, top ratings, etc.
Wow.
They did season 2, #1 show in the country, top ratings, etc. And it spawned Survivors. I think they have it in several other countries now as well. So then they come along to season 3, which is my season. They're like, okay, how are we going to up our game and make this like even more fun to watch?
I know
and
what they thought. They said we should get Kelly on the show.
They're like, find this like 21-year-old asthmatic blonde with like unexceptional physical abilities and let's watch her die. No, that wasn't it. They thought, again, these are the Eco Challenge people and like everything they had done so far had paid off. So they thought like all their ideas were gold. So they just decided to keep making it harder. So they did it in Africa and we were on a game preserve. So you couldn't hunt.
Wow.
There was really not a lot of water. Like the water supply, if you've seen the show, that is a focal part of the show, that the water was straight up disgusting and full of animal poop. So that's fun. And so like that was our gift to America, was like 16 strangers starving to death in a pile of sand, drinking poop water. And lo and behold, Survivor went from being the #1 show in America over and over again to like, we were still top 5, but like we slipped. So it turns out people in America aren't so like jazzed about watching people like starve to death in the desert. So after our season, they did a big pivot, and the good people at CBS, it wasn't just all about Mark Burnett's preferences. CBS got involved. It's they're the ones paying for it. And so they said, why don't we scrap the whole starving to death thing and send them back to the beach where they could hunt and swim and wear bikinis. So after my season, they went, the big push for season 4 was back to the beach. And they've been on the beach ever since. So that's our claim to fame of Survivor Africa, was we were the only landlocked season. I like to say we were on the really big island, which is Africa. But yeah, it was fun. I mean, it was like a lot of Americans, it was my favorite show. And so to get to be on your favorite show when I was that young, my first interview was the day after I graduated from undergrad. So I was young, and it was an awesome show, and just getting to see the whole behind the scenes aspect made it worth it. I clearly did not win $1 million, but I had a great time.
Great. So I'm going to have Mel ask you a question next, okay, if she has a question, or maybe we can pick a question from one of the viewers. But my question to you at this point is, Kelly, so I've read your father's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. That was my first book of his that I read.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, and in that book, he talks a little bit about one of his daughters getting piercings and things like that. And which daughter was that?
Well, he only has one daughter, so that would have to be me. So yeah, when I was like 15, I mean, it's not like I was that rebellious as a kid. Honestly, I always got good grades, and I was class president and stuff, so I wasn't that rebellious. But I didn't have my ears pierced, and I thought it would be really cool to get my belly button pierced, because the year was whatever. It was probably 1996 maybe, or 1995. And, I don't know. I was just trying to be a thing like most teenage girls. So I went down to Hip Hair in Pacific Beach and got my belly button pierced with my best friend, Hillary Kerr. Drove my convertible down there, and we were in our cheerleading practice outfits.
So you could drive a convertible when you were 15?
I was 16. When I got my belly button pierced. So, and P.S., they should have never let me drive that car. That car was a death trap. And I look back on it, barely had seatbelts. It was a 65 Mustang, which my dad, Marshall Goldsmith, had purchased like for himself because he liked classic cars. But my dad is not a good driver. And it turns out, being a classic car enthusiast and a terrible driver, it's actually a deadly combination. So he was in several like really dangerous situations, like the brakes went out on his 57 Chevy and it crashed into a wall. Not good. So rather than say like, let's forgo this dream and sell our classic cars, he's like, oh, I should, like, my daughter's 16. I'll give her this 65 Mustang. She surely won't like go out and die. But those cars are hard to drive. And like, didn't mention, barely had safety belts. So anyways, that's the car we were in. We were in a hunter green 65 Mustang with tan interior, and I got my belly button pierced. And I thought if I came home and I was like honest and transparent about it, my parents would appreciate my honesty and I would get in less trouble. This is false. So I like lift up my shirt and show them the belly button ring, and like all hell breaks loose, right? Like, I think they just they couldn't punish me fast enough. Like, I had just gotten a new pair of shoes, and my dad's like throwing the shoes in the trash. Like they could not punish me fast enough. So, so the belly button ring, I don't think it lasted more than 3 hours. It was swiftly removed, never to be, I consider myself piercing free. It was never reinserted. So that was me. I am his only daughter. I like to think though that I don't have, that story kind of gives you a thought about what I was like as a kid, which is not totally accurate. I was actually pretty good as a kid, I think.
I like a little rebellion. I think it's spicy.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Okay, I have a question, and maybe I'm gonna go into like some real territory here. Raj, let me know if I'm too serious.
No, go for it. No. Go for it. By the way, okay, before you say that though, this is, we for those who are coming in late, we're going to brand this HappySmarts Happy Hour. And so I have my juice, okay? It's only 11:30 in the morning or so here in Austin, so too early to start drinking wine, alcoholic beverages. But if you're in India, it's 11 p.m. I'd be sorely disappointed. Actually, I shouldn't say these things, okay? I'd be sorely disappointed if you're not drinking grapes, okay? All right.
There you go.
So, with that, okay, over to you, Mel.
Okay. So Kelly, as I understand it, you study human behavior as it relates to scarcity of resources. Did you begin that study? Did Survivor have anything to do with that, or is that just like a fun fact about your life that everyone always asks you?
It's an interesting question, and the short answer is I don't really know, honestly. And Raj knows what this is like. Like, when you get into graduate school, I had a million ideas about what I wanted to study, and scarcity was kind of in my mind, but it wasn't top of mind. And if you look at my resume, which I believe Raj has done, because Raj is actually one of my esteemed co-authors, my research in the beginning was all over the place. I studied brand extensions, really hardcore marketing, what I consider to be more hardcore, like actual marketing questions, like, if someone's buying toothpaste, how do you get them to buy floss, that kind of stuff. So adjacent products, brand extensions, again, what you think of when you think of like the 4 Ps in marketing. But then as I got older in the field, and really what happened that was the trigger for me to move into studying scarcity was I was on the job market in 2008. So I was on the job market in the middle of the economic recession. And I had all these great interviews. And our job market is very structured, as Raj knows. And so my first round, I had like 24 AMA interviews at literally like all the top schools. It was awesome. And I'm like, I'm going to crush this job market. I'm getting all the jobs. Then I had 9 flyouts, which is a good return rate. Yeah. And of my 9 flyouts, though, 4 had hiring freezes. And I was like, crap, right? Like, here I am. I've like suffered through 5 years of graduate school and I got all the first round interviews. And now it's like watching all my hopes like peter out and die. So that felt bad. And it wasn't just that experience, because I think like, this ties directly into my interest in scarcity. I ended up getting a great job. So I ended up getting a job at the Kellogg School of Management, but I was under this like oppressive threat of what if for so long. Our academic job market is really long. And it wasn't just that there was a scarcity of jobs going around, at the time there, and to this date, right, with the sustainability initiatives and climate change, there was a lot of talk about what the world was running out of. So a lot of these, like what we call macro level scarcity cues. And I got really interested in understanding how those affected human behavior and also just the way we treat each other, because my own experience as a consumer bumbling through the world at that time was like, I couldn't make it through the store without being exposed to certain reminders of what I was running out of. And if you layer on top of that scarcity marketing cues, which is a real mainstay in the marketer's toolkit, right? We're all getting these ads in our inboxes, like one day to buy, 20% off, et cetera. Yeah. Like consumers are exposed to scarcity reminders all the time. So again, now tethering this to my initial interest in these kind of hardcore marketing questions, I wanted to understand more about what these scarcity reminders were doing to human behavior. So I'm sure Survivor like planted the seed early on, but then really my experience during the economic recession was what hit the gas pedal on me turning that into a research stream once I sat down at that desk at Kellogg and got to kind of forge my own path with research.
I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Okay, so I did get to read the thesis of one of your published papers.
Which one? I hope it wasn't boring.
You have 3 that are like called out. There were 3 big things called out on your website, and one of them was talking about this. One of the behaviors that become, there's 2 behaviors that get expressed in scarcity, and one is generosity, and one is like taking.
Selfishness. Yep.
Right. And you posit that both of them are actually selfish, because in the being generous, I'm being generous because I think I'm going to get.
I should say they can be, right? So we had this situation in the lab. So those studies, that was Carolyn Rue's dissertation that was published in 2015, and she's amazing. But it's so funny, like the truth and baseball behind those studies is like, Carolyn is like such a sweet, pro-social, good, make the world better human. Like she's her heart is huge. And she was really into, we both were interested in scarcity, but she was really into, what can we do to get scarcity to like make people do the right thing and make people help others? And I just rolled into that project like a dark cloud. And I'm like, it's not going to happen. Like people are going to take care of themselves. And what was kind of cool that we had these really opposing perspectives was that, in the lab, you're supposed to go in with these directional hypotheses and predictions, like based on theory, what's going to happen before you test it. We didn't know. Like I was really strongly saying that people were going to become more selfish. And she was really strongly saying that people would actually take care of each other if the world was running out of stuff. And what was kind of cool in terms of writing the paper was you could draw on literature that supported either point. So my training is really like behavioral decision theory, which is a cousin of behavioral economics. And from that perspective, there's again, the supply and demand curves. As the supply goes down, demand goes up. As gas gets more expensive, we will pay more for it, and paying more for it is a way of competing for it. So I had this more classical economic perspective that was like, look, people are going to compete harder for stuff that there's less of. Scarcity creates value, period. Whereas Carolyn there's a whole other research stream, more from psychology, which looks at essentially the bottom of the pyramid. And what they find is really the lower you are in terms of the status hierarchy, people are more communal. They have higher levels of empathy. They're more likely to take care of each other. And she's saying, look, if we're making people feel like they don't have enough, why are you saying it's going to make them more competitive? Shouldn't it actually make them more cooperative based on this whole other literature stream? And I was like, all right, girl, this battle is on. We're taking this into the lab and we're going to see what happens. So we ran about 100 million studies to test this because invariably we're going to say some literature is wrong. And when you do that, you really have to support your point, right? And I sort of won in that we did see, like with these classic economic games, which are boring and you most of the people listening, I apologize in advance because they're tedious. But these classic economic games like the dictator game, etc., when you have to allocate resources between yourself and an anonymous other person, what do we see in the lab? Well, we saw what we're seeing with the friggin' toilet paper in the stores right now. People were putting themselves first, right? Everybody's taking care of themselves. They didn't give the other people nothing, but they just made sure that they had their own base covered before they, like, I like to think of it like in the plane when you put on your own oxygen mask first. So that's what we saw over and over again. And then we started to enter into this like publication process, which is Raj knows well. Raj just got an excellent publication out. Congratulations. But the publication process is long, right? And you've got a million reviewers weighing in. And of course, there's people on the review team that are like Carolyn that are saying, this doesn't make any sense, right? Because look at the people at the bottom of the pyramid. Those are the kind-hearted, generous souls taking care of each other. You know, how can you reconcile these results? Mm-hmm. So basically, we had to find at least one factor that would push around whether or not people responded to scarcity buying. Basically, we had to show it could work both ways because we had to reconcile these conflicting viewpoints, which is fine and which is very normal in academia. So we took an easy route to doing that, which is basically that if people, as we show, when they experience scarcity, when they're reminded of resource scarcity, they're like looking to put themselves first and advance their own self-interest. It should be true that they then become more likely to help others if they view helping others as a way to help themselves. And it's this form of impure altruism, right, where people are giving to get. But I will still say, I don't think that's a bad thing, right? I think that highlighting, it here in the West, and you have to remember, we ran these studies mostly on Northwestern undergraduates. So these are people largely in positions of privilege here in the United States. I'm not saying it's going to replicate for all cultures. And in fact, I think there's good reason to believe it might not. But here in the United States, that's the pattern we're seeing. I never had a problem with the fact that when people are reminded of scarcity, if they're doing the right thing, they're doing it for the quote unquote wrong reasons. I think if you're we did dependent variables like whether or not people donated to charity, for example. I think if you're UNICEF, you're not too judgy about what gets people donating to help the children of the world. I think they're just happy that people are contributing. And that's the perspective I try to take. Even though scarcity can lead us to put ourselves first, it doesn't mean we're necessarily going to tear others down. And especially during this pandemic, right? We have to reconcile the reality that having sick people among us is bad for everybody. Yeah. So taking care of ourselves means taking care of each other. And again, if that gets us to be a little bit more courteous, a little bit more thoughtful, to maybe think about the bottom of the pyramid, even if we're in the middle of the pyramid, I'm okay with that.
Okay, so I have a follow-up question to this, right? As students who have done my course know, who have completed the course, because I talk about it towards the end of my course. I talk about this concept of abundance mindset versus scarcity mindset. And the idea is that people with an abundance mindset believe that everybody can win. My win doesn't have to come at a loss to somebody else. And people with a scarcity mindset believe that for me to win, somebody else has to lose. Life is some game kind of a thing, okay?
Right.
Which is very aligned with how I think that you guys are describing scarcity. And my feeling always was, not that I have a knowledge of a lot of papers on this, but my feeling was of the papers that I've read, is that people with an abundance mindset end up being more generous to other people. And people who feel that life is a zero-sum game end up being more self-centered and selfish. And I think that your research is adding a kind of an asterisk to it and saying that that is only true if people don't see a way in which their altruism, impure altruism, will benefit them in the next round of the game, so to speak.
Well, so one thing, like the reviewers cut this cool study from the paper. So if you're watching, reviewers, thanks a lot. You made everybody miss out. But we had this cool study in there which actually leveraged the Ultimatum game. And in the Ultimatum game, it's strategic to give more to the other person because the other person basically decides if they're going to accept the offer. And if they say no, then everybody gets zero. Right. So if you're really just being a jerk, you could still in the Ultimatum game offer them $1. And if you get zero, you don't care because you screwed them over. We never saw scarcity increasing that type of behavior. And in fact, in the Ultimatum game where it was strategic to share, we saw that those who were in the scarcity condition were actually sharing more than those in the control condition. So we have several studies, if you look across all our packages, that show that scarcity can increase generosity above and beyond the control condition when people realize that being generous and helpful, right, is going to come back to help them. So I do think it's an important asterisk to your point. I also think, though, that there's different types of scarcity. So there's scarcity, like, for example, the toilet paper, if you go to the Target, right? That is sort of a zero-sum game. There's only going to be so much that they put on the shelf. Right. But there's lots of other times and common ways in which we experience scarcity that has nothing to do with social comparisons, right? So whether or not like, for example, whether or not you have enough money in your bank account often doesn't have to, if your neighbor has more or less money, unless for some reason you and your neighbor are competing for business,
Yeah.
it'd be very unusual, right? For that to truly be a zero-sum game. It's a game where the resource is almost seen as continuous. And I think that's something we could leverage here too, because one thing we have found in our studies is that scarcity can actually have a lot of really positive effects, especially if you take out the social comparison component of it.
Mhm.
So if you just think about the stuff, like we'll focus on our bank accounts here, right? So if you feel like you don't have enough money, you want to be at X and you're at X minus, 10,000, it can make you more creative in terms of coming up with new ways to get that money. There's a cool paper that was not written by me, but I wish it was, by Meng Zhu and her colleagues, that shows that scarcity can actually increase creativity. I think this ties into the Indian concept of jugaad. Am I saying that right?
Yeah,
that
that's right.
scarcity makes you like scrappy, right?
Right.
And I think there's something to that. And I've read, I kid you not, I think like 220 nonfiction business books in the past 18 months or so, including Raj's, which is excellent and one of my favorites. And I think there is this notion, if you read enough of these nonfiction business books, like an abundance mindset sounds good, but on the other hand, being fat and happy has negative consequences, right? It has negative consequences. It has the Mel Robbins work, for example, and she's not an academic, but I do like her perspective. This notion that being fat and happy can actually lead to, ironically, a lot of dissatisfaction because you don't have that challenge. That sense of not having enough can be a real spark in your engine to kind of get you going. And that's the aspect of scarcity. Now that I've worked with Carolyn for long enough that I'm trying to make the world a better place, like that's the aspect of scarcity that I like to focus on is, how can scarcity be that spark in the engine that brings out our best selves, that makes us more creative? And I think there's promise for that. Now, how you apply it in a pandemic is complicated because, not only are we experiencing scarcity of toilet paper in the stores, but also, right, there's just a real threat to our health. There's tons of macro level uncertainty. So there's a lot to unpack here that above and beyond just a straight like reminders of resource scarcity manipulation. But the literature and the studies we've done give me hope that there are positive consequences from feeling a little bit constrained. And I really hope we'll see people move in that direction as this continues to unfold.
I have a question.
Sure.
So you said that in these studies, once people realized that by giving, they actually got more, and they started giving.
Yeah.
What helped them make that realization? What was the aha?
So this is an interesting, like methodologically, it's a boring point, but I think practically it's an interesting point. All we did, the conditions were very similar, and we've done this across several different studies. And when you're an empiricist, like you by design, you're trying to make everything as similar as possible, control for everything, but change that one like critical ingredient. And the one critical ingredient we changed was usually like one sentence that would say, like, for example, we ran a study, this is the one I talk about in my TEDx talk, where we were asking undergrads, we describe a scenario that undergraduates often will encounter where they're studying really hard for a test, it's not going great. They ask a friend for some help on the test, the friend helps them, and they end up getting a really good grade. And then we ask them if they want to give the friend a gift to say thank you. And when that was all we said, people in the scarcity condition were significantly less generous. So they were willing to spend less money on the gift. They said they were less likely to give anything, et cetera, than the control condition, which is consistent with the notion that people who have scarcity on their mind are they're keeping theirs, right? However, when we instead told people that if they gave the friend a gift, that friend might be more likely to help them again in the future if they need it, the people in the scarcity condition gave much more than the control condition, which is interesting because to me, and we have other studies that I think support this broadly, it's almost like people in the scarcity condition paid more attention to the information, right? We actually had a whole paper that's still much rejected, but it's good. With Annie Wilson and other. It is good. That basically, because it's part of the reason the paper suffered in the review process is it makes, honestly, I'll be transparent about this, it makes people on the control condition look stupid. Because when you juxtapose people in the scarcity condition and the control condition, it's like the people in the scarcity condition were better at responding to the information than the people in the control condition. And I think there's something to that. I think when you have scarcity on your brain, you get sensitive, oh gosh, I need to get this right. My resources are hanging in the balance. Whereas when you're fat and happy in the control condition, why should you deploy your cognitive resources to really understanding the task, especially when this is a hypothetical experiment that's being run online, right? Why should you burn your cognitive resources on it? Whereas people in the scarcity condition, they're just much more sensitive to the associated benefits. And yeah, I think I'm hoping that paper ever sees the light of day. Because again, I think there's something interesting and important there. And hopefully, again, it will transition into how we respond to this pandemic. Can we be a little bit better about processing the information in our environment? Because this really shines a light on the fact that our resources are unstable. And certainly, like, if you're in the scarcity space at all, like, I don't often use financial deprivation as a manipulation, but you have to read a lot of those papers. So I'm familiar with a lot of that work. And I mean, I think even those of us with relatively stable jobs, this is a very threatening situation to us.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it is, right? And I mean, if it's not your savings account or your checking account, it's your 401k or it's your future, it's something, right? And what I'm hoping is, yes, our economy is taking a hit, but in many ways, our economy was built on the backs of people spending money they didn't have to spend, and that's unfortunate too. So I'm really hoping that this can be a bit of a wake-up call for all of us to do some zero-based budgeting and think about like what we don't need and kind of get a little bit simpler in how we live. And hopefully in doing so, not only can we rebuild our economy at the same time, but we can also live a little bit of a better and less stressful life.
Right. And maybe have a little bit less of an impact on the environment, right?
There's that too. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've all seen the articles talking about how even just, getting humans out of their cars for 6 weeks has had a relatively massive shift in terms of air quality and stuff.
Right.
And I hope that information isn't lost when we are in the wake of this pandemic, because everyone's going to, as Raj knows, or anyone who's ever read anything about psychology knows, we're so desperate to get back to what feels normal to us that I think it's almost like this pandemic's a little bit like pressing down a spring. We're all being constrained. We're all staying home. We're all doing the right thing. But you take your hand off the spring and say it's okay to go back, and boom, consumption might skyrocket. And I hope that we're able to retain some of the learning, that unique insights we're able to get here, and maybe curb some of our behaviors, which actually have negative consequences, both for us and our bank accounts, but also for the environment.
Right. Wonderful. We're getting some wonderful comments from people here. And I think this is the point. It's like we are halfway into it. We have another half an hour to go. And this is the point at which I'm going to have you wear your dad hat.
Okay, let's do it.
And we are in the topic where I think his expertise would be like awesome if he had been here. But for those of you who tuned in late, the reason why Marshall is not here is because of some technical problems. But he's promised to be on another show in the future. Okay, so we are going to get our dose of Marshall. So here's my question to you, Kelly, okay?
Yes.
This is based off poll results. I told you that there was a poll below this on Facebook, and I don't know, I can't see it right now, but I took a quick look at the results before we started this. And in the results, somewhat surprisingly, what we found is that, just to kind of back up a little bit, in the poll I asked people whether the coronavirus outbreak has made life more stressful, less stressful, just as stressful as it was before.
Right.
And surprisingly, okay, maybe this is a self-selection here, but surprisingly on this poll, the majority picked less stressful. All right. Now, having said that, I did a similar poll with my MBA students and my undergrad students. I taught them yesterday. And there, a good 50% of the students said, 80% of the students said it made it more stressful. Okay. And so I want you to, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this independently, but I certainly want you to put on the Marshall hat and tell us a little bit about why some people are finding it to be more stressful, some people are finding it to be less stressful. And for those who are finding it to be more stressful, if you could have some advice, some suggestions on how to mitigate the stress. And I should let you know that among the category of people who said it's more stressful, the biggest proportion was the set of people who said that it was more stressful because of job insecurity. Okay.
Yeah, I see that. Well, it's almost impossible not to answer that question like an academic. So this is a bit of a cheat here, but I promise I will circle back. And when it comes to stress management, I will don my best Marshall Goldsmith cap. So with respect to understanding why a significant portion of your viewers said that it was less stressful, right? Let's think about our lives pre-coronavirus. Like, it's not like all of us were skipping down the lane and picking daisies, right? Life is really hectic. And especially for those with, I'm sure all your viewers are smart, have hard jobs, it's competitive. It's tough, especially if you juggle a family or other obligations. We live stressful, hard lives. And being forced to take a step back and sit at home and live a little bit more simply. And I mean, even just, this sounds goofy, right? But even just the social pressures people face, it's not nothing, right? You're at work, you feel pressured to go out to drinks after work with your colleagues, then you've got to deal with your kids. Then you got to think about, oh, should I call my parents? I mean, there's a lot of social pressures on top of our work pressures, on top of our family pressures that many of us juggle. And so I think for some people, the invitation or implied constraint to take life a little bit simpler, make life a little bit simpler, it can be a real relief. And again, remember that when this ends, right? I actually was talking to Pete McGraw, and he was saying that everybody should be, who I know you interviewed for this before. He was saying everybody should be keeping a journal now. And I think I have not done that, but I think it's actually good advice because, there's a lot of things that become habits, like, for example, like socializing every week with people from colleagues from the office, et cetera. And those habits these behaviors start out fun in the beginning, but over time they start to feel like burdens.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it be great if this sort of massive shift in our day to day could allow us to take a step back and take inventory, not just of our spending, which I was just talking about, but also just of the stressors that we face and like what really has a return on investment for us in terms of how we spend our time, because secretly, where does money come from? It comes from your time. And so if you're spending your time on stuff that's really not that rewarding to you, that's money that you could be making at the very least, or you could be like sleeping or relaxing or doing something else, right? So I think that, if there can be any silver lining for those who have less uncertainty in terms of the job, like your MBAs, and we'll circle back to that point. But for those of us that feel like our jobs are relatively secure, we can pay to keep the lights on. If we have some psychological freedom from that, it would be great if we could use that cognitive bandwidth to do an inventory, again, not just of our spending and our consumption, but also in terms of our time. Because we have, like some people, right? I think myself included, right? We have more time on our hands.
Right.
And so, just get strategic in how you want to spend it once all this lifts. So I think that would be my guess for those experiencing less stress. For those experiencing more stress, that's a little bit more obvious, right? So those, like I'm teaching MBAs as well. And if you're staring, as I was in 2008, if you've just invested a lot into this degree and you're staring down the barrel of an uncertain job market, that sucks, right? Or people, I've got lots of students who are starting their internships this summer. Some internships were canceled. Some were cut from 10 weeks to 4 weeks. Some they now have to do remotely, and they don't know if they're going to learn what they would have learned or make the colleagues that they could have made. And there's it's easy to have those counterfactuals or that comparisons and that what if, and it feels a little unfair. Right? Of course it feels unfair. Though at the same time, I think we struggle, at least some of us, where, you feel a sense of loss. It's what it is. It's a sense of loss from this life that you were planning on having, and then coronavirus got in the way. But at the same time, we feel guilty about our sense of loss because we still have our lives and we still have our health, and so many people don't. And that's a very complicated way to feel, like feeling guilty about feeling guilty. And it's just, I think it's when you get into that stacked pattern of kind of judging yourself, it's really important to take a deep breath. Now I'll be Marshall Goldsmith. It's really important to take a deep breath, take a step back, let it go. Like more now than ever, it's critical to not judge others and to not judge ourselves, because it's just like, for example, if you've ever had, a close friend die, everybody reacts to death differently. Everybody reacts to loss differently. And I think it's important in those contexts and in this context where we're all broadly experiencing trauma and loss, let's be a little bit less judgmental of each other and a little bit kinder. That's what my dad would say.
Yeah, that's true. He, in fact, has that now as his kind of sign off or signature or whatever on the email, saying that people just take care of yourself and others. That's what he has now. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. You mentioned guilt there, so I want to kind of like piggyback on that word, because you do have a paper there, which is on my favorite.
I do. So do you, because we start you guys.
Oh, you did? Well, that's partly why I like it.
Unhealthy equals tasty. Raj has a really good paper on unhealthy equals tasty. You guys should all read it.
Right. So in the paper, what you guys argue basically is that guilt can actually increase your pleasure from things. Enjoyment of things.
Increase your pleasure?
Yeah. So can you explain that?
So there's taking a step back, there's different kinds of guilt, right? And so like major interpersonal transgressions, like, you should have been at your dying sister's bedside and you went and got in line for the new iPhone. Like, that's different. That's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I'm talking about like Northwestern undergraduates and everyday folks where we did a lot of studies with food, which is why we cite Raj's paper, where basically we looked at people who were eating candy. And these were like, we pretended it was a test market. And you make half the group feel a little bit guilty eating the candy. Then you have the other half of the group that's the control condition that doesn't feel the guilt. And we found that those people who felt a little bit guilty eating the candy experienced more pleasure from their indulgent consumption, right? And we base it on this cognitive association between guilt and pleasure, because, not everything that makes you feel guilty induces pleasure, but like a lot of like these common everyday consumer experiences do, right? These kind of like guilty pleasure. The term guilty pleasures exists for a reason, right? And so that's really what we leverage there. And we did it with candy eating. We did it with like looking at online dating profiles. So people who felt guiltier looking at online dating profiles rated the other people as more attractive, and they were more interested in following up with them. So that was one of my first papers, and it was a really fun one. It was fun to design the studies.
So I like that. So, usually when you feel guilty, the guilty pleasure term, I think, comes from how you're not supposed to do something, but you're tempted by it, you do it, and you feel guilty. And so the pleasure kind of comes first and then the guilt comes later. But in your studies, you're kind of reversing the direction of causality, right?
So
Is that
I think it depends. And Kristen Duke's dissertation, she came out of UCSD and she's at the University of Toronto now. She actually looks at people who experience guilt before you do it versus guilt after you do it, and finds that it has different consequences, which you could imagine. And I would even wonder, like, semantically, if guilt after you do something, when that morphs into regret. Right. And regret has negative consequences. So I think a little bit of sexy guilt when you're in the like choosing process or when you're in the consuming process, we find the positive consequences. After the fact, if you experience a lot, certainly as guilt escalates and transforms into regret, it's not going to be good. And also, though, after you eat the cookie's gone. Right. So eventually the pleasure is going to wear off. And if you're just left with the guilt, right, you would think they would tell you that, for example, with eating, that the people who have that guilt response over time, they learn not to do it because you are conditioned to understand that, yes, I get that short-term hit of pleasure, but then the long-term guilt just isn't worth it. And maybe those people who experience that, maybe that's some of the secret sauce that determines if your guilt over cookies is actually going to decrease your cookie consumption or ironically increase your cookie consumption, the extent to which you kind of associate that experience with that negative outcome.
So that then assumes, though, that people know this, that the guilt is going to enhance the pleasure. Do you think that
I don't think it's conscious. I don't think it's conscious at all. I think that basically what happens is if you have what we find in our studies, if you have a little bit of that like sexy, fun, guilt, forbidden fruit of the experience, it tastes better to you, right? Yeah. And you remember the taste. You don't remember like, I feel guilty and that made me like it better. You remember that it tastes better. Yeah. And that's more likely to, and that alone is more likely to make you want to do it again. Now, if you've got a ton of guilt after the fact, that could cancel it out. That's why I think these and when you think about the term guilty pleasures, they're not generally talking about like massive overarching guilt. It's these like little sexy, fun temptations, which, yeah, like I said, for our first paper in graduate school it was fun to design the studies. It was fun to design. I designed these online dating profiles. I had to go buy a bunch of candy. I mean, it was really fun. Certainly more fun than brand extensions and toothpaste.
All right. So, Mel, before you ask your question, should we also let people know that we are coming up to the point where people can raise their own questions? And okay. And I'm actually able to see it. So, both of us can kind of keep out an eye for the questions that come up. Are you able to see the questions, Kelly?
I am not. You're going to have to tell me.
That's fine. Don't worry about it. So, Mel or I will then ask you the questions that the audience is asking. Okay.
Spectacular.
Go ahead. Mel, go ahead.
Okay. I'll start with my question and then we'll see when the questions roll in. Okay, so in your own research of this topic of scarcity and its effect on behaviors, what have you taken and adopted into your own life because it makes sense from a utility perspective?
That is a really interesting question. I will say, like, this was a bit of wisdom that I got from my advisor, Ravi Dar, who's at Yale, even though when he said it, I feel like I did not take it so positively. But so what he told me when I was in graduate school and I was whining that we didn't have enough money to run studies, because the way that was done at the time at Yale was very sloppy. And so I was whining that we didn't have enough money to run studies. And his comment back to me over email was, it's never the runners at Greenwich High School in Connecticut that, win the marathon. It's always the guy from Kenya. You can do more with less. And I was like, hey, I didn't like it at the time. But I do think that, this I'll say as a parent, right? It's something that I think about with my kids, because it is really easy to throw money at the problem to I don't know, it's kind of a crass way to think about parenting, but like now they're so bored during this stay-at-home quarantine time that it's tempting to be like, I should buy all the Lego sets and give a new Lego set every day. And like, that will keep them engaged. But I actually think I haven't done that for no other reason than financially, that seems like a bad choice. But, I think it's important, like with kids and with parenting, to allow them to get a little bit bored with what they've got in front of them and come up with creative ways to utilize their current resources. And so I try to remind myself of Ravi and his quote about the runners and the research that we've also found that shows that scarcity and being stuck with maybe less than the optimal amount. And this goes, and Raj knows Darren Dahl too. Darren and Paige have research on this too, that shows that when you have constrained inputs to like build a toy or make something cool, you're actually more creative in terms of how you use what you've got. So I try to give my kids those experiences. And if nothing else, it allows me to justify being cheap. right?
And Kelly is not cheap. Kelly is not. She's just saying this. Okay, so there's a question here from Joe Bukoff, who both you and I know, Mel. Okay, hi Joe. So his question is an interesting one. He says, "How does scarcity influence dating?" Something about this question tells me that this is a very personal question for him. Okay.
Well, Joe, let me just tell you right now, Joe, if you've got some time during your quarantine and you want to get on the internet, Google sex ratios, spelled like it sounds, and you'll see a body of literature from Vlad Grishkevicius and colleagues in the evolutionary psychology field. Sarah Hill, actually, she's in Texas and she's phenomenal. And so what they find with sex ratios would be basically like the ratio of men to women in the room. Like it's exactly what it sounds like. And when there's a scarcity of perceived mates, so it's not a 50-50 ratio, like you're in a situation, like you're a gentleman and you're in a situation, you're a heterosexual gentleman, and you're in a situation where it's like 30% women and 70% men, people's behavior gets crazy. And so I don't want to, and that's when you get like the signaling and the spending, and they actually have macro level data where you look at sex ratios across cities and you look at the credit card spend for men. And the things men spend money on are fundamentally different when there's fewer women. So scarcity of reproductive partners in the population. So it's really fascinating stuff. And I can't speak to all their findings because number one, there's a lot of them. And number two, I'm not an evolutionary psychologist, but I will tell you that scarcity of reproductive partners does fundamentally shift the way people behave. And for women, actually, one of the early papers on scarcity reminders and how it affects decision-making was by Sarah Hill, who's at TCU, evolutionary psychologist, like I mentioned. And she published this paper in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology on the term, what she coined the lipstick effect, which is that when you threaten women's financial resources, and she was leveraging, this is coming out of the recession, so she was leveraging that as a manipulation. When you threaten women's financial resources, they actually spend more on cosmetics. So they're more likely to buy luxury cosmetics over discount cosmetics. And I think the interpretation they kind of softly suggested in the paper, I think maybe they're soft about it because it's not necessarily popular opinion, is that if if your finances are unstable, maybe you could like look attractive and team up with a dude and through doing so kind of stabilize your finances. There was a follow-up paper on that looking specifically at the lipstick effect, which painted a slightly rosier picture and said that actually sometimes women, like they did replicate the pattern that under times of financial uncertainty or under conditions of scarcity, women spend more on cosmetics, but they also found it can exist totally independently of mating motives. And that in fact, it can be because women want to do better at work and they perceive that like they're seen as a better worker if they look better. I know I spent like at least an hour on my hair because I'm like, hashtag scarcity, hashtag Raj is judgy.
You're looking good. You're looking good, Kelly. I was actually talking to Suchi, who, by the way, I just confirmed this. She's going to be on this show next week. Okay, Suchi from Stanford, and she was telling me yesterday when I was talking to her that lipstick sales have gone up.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what they got with
and now you can't wait,
recession.
right? I mean, social distancing, physical distancing, etc. And I maybe it's job related. Maybe people want to kind of look professional for interviews and things like that. But she said that the reason could be that people just want to feel good.
Yeah, there's that too. So that's the third interpretation, right? There's sort of the external validation from significant potential reproductive partners. There's external validation at the workplace. There's feeling good about myself, and I don't know if we ever had data on it, but there's a lot of discussion about the way people spend money. Again, we can reflect back on the recession. And there was discussion around how people liked these everyday luxuries that made you feel like it was going to be okay at a relatively low cost. So things like buying a Starbucks drink, which, ain't nobody need a Starbucks drink, but it makes you feel like a little bit of indulgence where you're not, going over top, but you're letting yourself feel a little bit more like a human. So we'll see what happens. I don't know. I think I get asked a lot, like if we're going to see a return to that type of everyday indulgence in the wake of the pandemic. And the short answer is I don't know. I think it depends on how long it's going to last. But I certainly hope people are, within their budget constraints, doing things to make themselves feel better.
All right, very good. So Joe's clarified that it wasn't a personal question. Thank you, Joe. Sorry for suggesting that.
Either way, it was an interesting question, Joe.
It was a very interesting question, and he says that he's very thankful that he asked it. So there's another question from Shiva Prasad Anjameti, and his question is, do you have any tips for how we can move towards more simplistic living? So
Yes.
for example, he suggests, how do we kind of figure out what's a need and a want?
Let me tell you, I
okay.
would say don't even judge yourself on the needs and wants.
Mm.
I always, and this is going to assume you have a computer that has, Microsoft, but that is the only assumption I'm going to make. I always tell my MBA students that you're just one good spreadsheet away from changing your life. Like I'm a big, dogmatic proponent of the gospel of the Excel file. And that is true here. So what's his name? What's his name?
Shiva Prasad, I think it was.
Shiva Prasad. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to open up an Excel file. Hopefully you've been tracking your expenses with, an online bank or with mint.com or any of those aggregators. And if you're not, hopefully you can. And if you can't, you're going to have to write some stuff down in your Excel file. All you have to do is go through and take a non-judgmental inventory of the way you've been spending money. And ideally for the past 3 months, ideally pre-pandemic, right? So don't let it be the weird stuff where you bought all the toilet paper. So and the more data you get, the better, right? So do a non-judgmental inventory of the way you spend your money. Then what I want you to do is use that really easy sort function in Excel. So the most expensive things rise to the top. And if you want to be super duper fancy, and this is going to take you some time, but I have done it, and you've got time maybe because it's quarantine, right? You really need to think about your cost per use. So if this is going to sound crazy, but this is the level that this girl takes it to, so you can do it too. So for example, I buy big things of shampoo, but I don't know how long does that last? And so part of the reason I buy a lot actually off Amazon is it allows me to track my repurchase rates. And I can actually get a sense of how much do I spend every month on shampoo? Even though I buy a big one, it lasts me 6 months. How much am I spending every month on shampoo, et cetera? So I went through and did this and it took me a while, but I studied my spending and I came up with an understanding of my churn every month. What does it cost for me to exist as a human being living this life? And then I thought, okay, I know that now. What does it take for me to exist as a human being living a slightly more modified life? So that's when you do that stack ranking and you say, all right, what's got the highest cost per month, right? And what I found was, at least for me, the things that had by far the highest cost per month were any services that involved other human beings, right? So getting my nails done or, getting my hair cut. Things like that and it's not like I'm going to the world's fanciest nail salon, but that stuff adds up. And so really, and then you have to start thinking about what the return on investment is for you. And that's going to vary person to person. But for example, I was able to find that by cutting back on some of these services that, I liked, but maybe didn't need, I was able to get a personal assistant for, I think it was 5 hours a week. And that blew my doors with how much I was able to get done. My house was all cleaned up. Everything was inventoried. And I wasn't spending any more money than I had been before because I just cut some stuff that had a lower return on investment.
Hang on, so you have a personal assistant, you said?
I did. So this is pre-COVID, right? So it was 5 hours a week too. So it's not like I'm not living.
No. I mean, I don't mean to kind of make you feel guilty about it. I'm just interested. I would want one too.
Yeah, I hired an undergrad. It was super easy. No, it was insanely easy. So if you're at a university, it's even easier because a lot of times they have job posting boards. So I just posted this job that was general personal assistant, run errands, organize my basement, drop off my dry cleaning, blah, blah, blah. I got this lovely woman who was a senior at Vanderbilt who was happy to do it. And what I paid, I was actually making money on the deal because my expenses I cut were higher than what it cost to hire her for 5 hours a week. And for me, what was cool about it just being I did 5 hours a week on Friday is throughout the week, I would be making her list, right? And it was everything I didn't want to do, right? So return my Amazon boxes, go to the dry cleaners, right? And then I had this delightful Friday where I'd got those 5 hours I didn't want to spend were time I got back, time I could spend either, hanging out with my kids, doing stuff that was meaningful or making money or something. And again, it wasn't even just neutral in terms of cost. I was making money because I cut some stuff that I didn't really need. So this approach in business is sometimes called zero-based budgeting, where you just say, imagine that you weren't going to spend any money and then you slowly add the expenses that you can't do without. So your car payment, your house payment, your lights, your gas. But some of those expenses, like auto insurance, for example, if they bill you every 6 months, you really don't know what your monthly churn is. So just having that transparency in the way you spend money, you only have to do it once. It takes a while, but you only have to do it once. And you can really pull some big levers and you can make your life a lot better. So if you've got some extra time during this pandemic, I strongly recommend doing a thorough, non-judgmental inventory of your spending behavior and cutting out, or just experiment with cutting out what you might not need and shifting funds to stuff that might be a little bit more rewarding.
That's great. So it's we got another 7 minutes only. All right. So we're going to end soon. So I just want to make sure that I'm not missing out on any of the other questions that people have asked. In the meanwhile, Mel, if you have a kind of a burning question, go ahead and ask it.
I have more of I can resonate with all of that. When I I used to buy a lot of shit.
Mm-hmm.
I would just buy a lot of stuff. I was working in the corporate world, and it was fall, and so I needed new boots because it's fall, and that's what you do in the fall in the Northeast. You wear cool boots, but I needed them in black and brown, like the perfect ones. And then I also needed tall ones and short ones to change it up. And then when I got the tall boots, I needed a dress to look cute with the tall boots.
Sure.
And so you can see how like the more I had, the more I needed.
Yeah.
And it was every single season I needed this. And I would spend hours searching for the perfect, most cool boot available on Zappos or whatever. And then fast forward a few years and my life drastically changed, my income streams drastically changed, and shopping like that just was not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't available to me. And since then, my need for things is just very different. Once I was unable to go buy everything I wanted, and I just stopped even thinking, stopped even thinking I could. What I've noticed is that everything I need finds its way to me.
There you go.
And I also have noticed that pretty much everyone in my community has two of almost everything.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of us have it sitting in the garage.
Mm-hmm.
And so now when I need something, like I needed a router recently for my house, instead of going on Amazon and getting a router, I posted to social media who has a router, and 20 people have routers sitting that fucking dust, and now I have it.
Yeah.
And this is sort of how I choose to acquire things now, is look in the community for who's got one that's dusty, versus being part of the consumer demand, chain where I'm just buying more things. So they're creating more things when we're all just like buying storage units and sitting on stuff.
Yeah.
So that's what was coming up for me. It's not a question. It's more of like, here's how that has shown up in my life.
That's awesome. So sometime back, Mel posted this thing on Facebook saying that she has a cute little puppy who wants it. And I said, I want it, but I was too late.
It's true.
Oh,
It's true. I found a puppy on the beach somewhere in Texas.
I think it's really good to think about how we can leverage, this is something I would have said pre-pandemic, but the secondary market, like our eBays, our social media, our Facebook, Facebook neighborhood or whatever it is, where you can share stuff with your neighbors. These types of communal kind of sharing associations, the Real is for if you want like more luxury stuff. These things didn't exist in the past. And I think as we got increased access to information and increased access to each other and decreased cost of shipping and whatnot, now they've got Mercari, they've got Poshmark, they've got lots of things you can do with your phone to sell stuff you don't need and kind of optimize, essentially optimize the supply chain such that people who have a high value for something are able to get it, and people who have it collecting dust in their storage unit can offload it. So that's also something I did. I feel like Raj laughed when he said I was cheap, when I said I was cheap, but I'm actually secretly am cheap. So especially, I think being a parent has made me all the cheaper. So like with kids stuff, and I have twins, right? So they go through stuff so fast that I was like, before my kids were born, I was so precious about everything. Like they're never going to wear hand-me-down clothes. Just sort of easy because they didn't have older siblings, right? And I actually don't have any siblings myself that have kids. So I don't know where these fictitious hand-me-downs are going to come from. But in my head, I was drawing a hard line that my kids were going to have all like fresh and clean stuff. But then the second they were born, and you see how fast they go through stuff. And I thought it was depressing to like constantly box stuff up and give it away or take it to Goodwill or throw it away in some cases. I was like, enough of this. So now I'm like, I open up the floodgates of anybody who wants to give me hand-me-down stuff for kids, from clothes to toys. Like I spend as little as possible. Not that I don't love my children. I do. But I love them enough to try to save money for their college, right? And I also love them enough to be practical about the fact they don't care. They're 5 and they still don't care what they wear. And they don't care if it came out of a box or it didn't. So I think that, and again, COVID kind of throws a monkey wrench into all this, because I think the sharing economy is going to take a hit because we're all supposed to be socially distant from each other and not swapping stuff. But fundamentally, that shift in consumer behavior away from sole ownership has a lot of benefits. And I think for those of us looking to cut costs, once the economy and returns to normal, and once COVID is, a thing of the past, hopefully, we can return to that. And it's a great way, I think you're right, to optimize what we have and maintain a little bit less inventory that we don't need.
All right. Thank you very much for that. And one last question. This is from Julia. And her question is an interesting one. This takes us back a little bit to the scarcity versus abundance thing. And she asks, in this pandemia times, is is being generous by helping other people, okay, in need, does it make you more happy than does depositing money in your own account?
That is a deep question, Miss Julia. Raj knows this literature better than I do, but we're both familiar with the work by Mike Norton and Elizabeth Dunn and colleagues. And Julia, it sounds like you might be as well, that talks about how spending money on others actually makes us happier. And, I think it's an open question. Honestly, if I'm just being honest based on my own experiences and based on the data that I've seen, when you give money or you help somebody else, you have that immediate hit of that rosy glow and that good feeling. When you put money in your bank account, it's pretty cold and clinical, and it usually is an online transaction. You don't really feel any feelings, right? So I think it's possible, strictly from an affective, emotional standpoint, that we actually would feel better giving money to others than putting money in our bank account. That said, there's some great books out there. There's one, the famous one is called Boundaries, that talks about, and I had never really taken this perspective until I read this book, that some people do give too much, right? And so do remember, if you're one of those people that really benefits from the rosy glow, and you're one of those lovely humans in this world that's out there helping and helping and helping till it hurts, this is a time when you need to remember that your bank account matters too, and you're not going to be able to take care of others if you can't take care of yourself. So even though it does feel great to give, and I think we should all continue to do it, obviously, don't give till it hurts. Do take care of yourself as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that advice. And Kelly, thank you so much for spending this awesome 1 hour with you.
My pleasure.
Yeah. And I'm just wondering, we covered so many interesting topics that we wouldn't have gotten all this, wisdom from you had we had to share this time with your lovely dad, right?
There you go.
So we need another hour.
There you go. Anytime. Hopefully it was useful to some listeners, and I appreciate the opportunity. It was great to see you, Raj.
All right. Great to see you as well. Mel, thank you again, as usual, for joining. And next week, guys, I'll send you guys an email about this, but we're going to have Suchi Huang from Stanford University. Okay. All right. Adios. Bye-bye.
See ya.